Yesterday, Israel's Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, said that the Israeli military will attack Hamas with a force like never before, as the militant group threatened to kill civilian hostages if airstrikes target Gaza without warning. Following Hamas's devastating surprise attack in Israeli territory last week Saturday, Israel has pounded what it describes as strategic Hamas locations in Gaza with airstrikes. Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant has ordered a complete siege of Gaza and said he will halt the supply of electricity, food, water, and fuel to the Palestinian enclave. However, in swift reaction, hours later, a spokesperson for Hamas, Hamdwink, said it will begin killing civilian hostages and broadcasting the act if Israel targets people in Gaza without warning. Meanwhile, in a televised speech, Netanyahu warned that the destruction of Hamas strongholds in Gaza is just the beginning. Joining us now on the morning show as we continue our discussion on the ongoing war between Israel and the Palestinians in Gaza is Professor Bolaji Akinyemi, Nigeria's former Minister of Foreign Affairs. Good morning, Prof, and thank you for joining us on the morning show.
Good morning, Dr. Abati. Good morning, Rufai. And good morning, Ayo. Thank you for bringing me onto your show.
Well, Prof, very quickly, bloodbath in the Middle East, hell on earth in the Middle East, the Israelis and the Hamas in a state of war. What are your observations?
Thank you. Normally, I'm happy to be on your show. This morning, I am not happy. I am not happy at war. We human beings are not the best creation of God, given what we do to ourselves. In my lifetime, this is probably the fourth war that I will witness. The Vietnam War, when I was a graduate student. Now we've had several Middle East wars. Now we are going through the war between Russia and Ukraine. We've had the cleansing of the Armenians from the Karabakh, and now the latest in the Middle East war. All within the lifetime of one man. I'm very unhappy. Bloodshed all over the place. Where do you want me to start? With Exodus, which they say promised Israel the land in the Middle East? With the Crusades, where the Arabs took over the Middle East under the Ottoman Empire, the First World War, which then gave the Middle East to British Mandate territory, the Second World War, where Europe, out of a sense of guilt because of what happened during the Holocaust, the pogrom against Jews, now gave the Middle East to the Jews. And the United Nations created two states. And that was the beginning of this unending violence, the beginning of the injustice, and the beginning of the war. And so, we are now faced with an issue where the language that is being used is the language of ethnic cleansing. International law being violated by both sides. And we need to be careful. When I say we, I mean we, the world. First of all, we created this problem when the United Nations decided to create two states in the Middle East, an Israeli state and an Arab state. And yet, From that time on, the world has not showed a level appreciation of the suffering inflicted upon the people there. As an aside, we Africans have cause to be thankful to God because the British first offered Uganda as a homeland for the Jews. It was the Jews who rejected that offer and said they don't have any attachment to Uganda, that their attachment was to that homeland which Exodus gave them. We need to be careful, secondly, because what we say is dependent on our source of news. I will be blunt. The CNN and the BBC are pro-Israel. Al Jazeera is pro the Palestinians. So our choice of language depends on the channel that we listen to. So this problem did not start 3 days ago with what with what Hamas did. As the Palestinian ambassador to the United Nations said, if you treat people as animals, they'll turn around and start behaving like animals. We even have it in our own cultural language here. If you flog a goat, it will start to run. When that goat gets to a wall, it will turn around and start to fight you. The way the Palestinians have been treated over the years, with the international community just condemning Israel for the way it has treated the Palestinians, just condemnation, and has done nothing to protect and advance the interests of the Palestinians, is unconscionable. And so to condemn Hamas for what he did 3 days ago, to me, is an aberration of justice. I am not saying that all the things that the Palestinians have done since the creation of Israel makes sense. It cannot. I mean, when you are based in an irrational situation, some of your own reactions and some of your own actions will have to be rational. But the Palestinians have been more sinned against than sinning. What we are hearing now from the Israeli Prime Minister is that he's going to wipe Hamas off the face of the earth in Gaza. If you do that, some of the people who are fighting on the side of Hamas were not even born when the Oslo Agreement was signed. So if you wipe out this generation of the Palestinians in Gaza, another generation, unless you are going to wipe out all Palestinians from the face of the earth, and you can't do that. Nobody has the capability to do that. You will simply be creating a new generation of embittered people who will continue to fight in order to get their justice. So the United Nations that created Israel has to now take responsibility for giving a way forward program. And what will be the way forward? Number one, we have to go back to the Oslo Accord. The two-state solution is still the best solution. Israel cannot continue to implement a plan that says it is the homeland for all Jews all over the world. And so the settlers continue to come in and take over Palestinian land, and they are protected by the Israeli government and by the Israeli army. The UN has to put a stop to this. the Palestinians must restate their acceptance of the state of Israel. Right. Yasser Arafat, whom I met several times, did this at the United Nations. Let the present leadership of the Palestinians restate their acceptance of the state of Israel as a homeland for the Jews. And the Israelis must remove the settlers from Palestinian land so we could have a state of the Palestinians.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Professor Akinyemi, for touching on some of the history, because it does inform, especially with regards to the narrative, depending on which media you're reading or which media you're getting your information from. So it's important to strike a balance in terms of the fact that some people call it unprovoked, but this has a historical context. Now, I want to focus on the civilians, in terms of the outcome of this. United Nations, UNICEF has, of course, tried to champion your children who are affected by the war going on in Israel and between Israel and Hamas, and also the fact that Israel has cut off fuel, electricity supply, food supply to Gaza. They say that they have their border under control, so there's limited movement, yet continuous bombing. Death tolls rising. What are some of the options available, and perhaps do you think the United Nations and other nations should be doing more to protect civilians caught up in this war?
Thank you, Ayo. I am sorry to say that civilians are always caught up in any war. Unfortunately, bullets and rockets are not programmed to make a distinction between soldiers and civilians. It is unfortunate, but that is a fact of life. I feel so sorry for the civilians, for children, for women, but don't forget that on both sides, children and women continue to be among the victims. There's very little you could do once the bullet starts flying. It will have to be a ceasefire. That's number one. Number two, a release of all prisoners on both sides. We cannot make a distinction between Jewish children and Palestinian children, between Jewish women and Palestinian women. There is no difference. Civilians are civilians, and it's unfortunate that they get caught on both sides. I must also appeal to the United States and the European countries. I know my appeal is going to fall on deaf ears because Biden faces an election next year. There is no American president who is going to criticize Israel in the middle of a war. And the United States saying he's going to back Israel and watch the back of Israel is playing politics with the life of the people, including Israeli people. The same thing with in Britain. The Conservative Party also faces an election next year. And so they are all outbidding each other in terms of, but they must realize that the government in Israel that they are supporting is the most atrocious government that Israel has had. Basically, I am pro-Israeli because what happened to them during the Second World War, we are all going to face Judgment Day. But it's not the Palestinians, it's not the Arabs who inflicted that Holocaust upon the Israelis. It is the Europeans, it is German, and the Europeans who could have saved Jewish lives by allowing them, taking them in as refugees, did not do so. And so out of a sense of guilt, they've always bent over backwards, and they are still doing so in the support of Israel. And let me say one thing. Netanyahu is trying to actually start a third world war by pushing America into a confrontation with Iran on this war. If he could only succeed, and that is his plan, to get America and Iran into a direct military confrontation, then God help all of us. The Americans have said they have no evidence at all that Iran is behind what Hamas did. And yet there are pro-Israel.
Okay, we'll go to a quick break. We'll come back. I'll fix your audio, Prof, if I ask my question. All right, welcome back. We have Professor Bolaji Akinyemi, Nigeria's former Minister of Foreign Affairs. And great to have you, Prof. And Prof, like I said, I'm always admiring you and chuckling at the back here and saying you're looking radiant and you're looking lovely this morning. Good to see you again, Prof. So let me go straight to it, Prof.
But my eyes are red from weeping over children.
It's so sad, Prof.
In the Middle East.
It's so sad, Prof. Prof, in all of this, I want to read a letter to you. The letter was dated 2nd of November 1917. And this was the letter that caused all of this we're having today. It was written by a man and signed by a man called Balfour, and it was addressed to Lord Rothschild, which says, His Majesty's government, with a view to favor the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people, will use their best endeavors to facilitate the achievement of this objective. All right? And the civil and religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine, or rights and political status enjoyed by Jewish people in any other country. I should be grateful if you will bring this declaration to the knowledge of the Zionist Federation. That was the letter that heralded the Balfour Declaration in 1917. Because in all of this, Prof, number one question is, we don't blame Britain that caused the problem. Secondly, 1937, the Peel Commission went ahead to talk about the two-state solution. So it wasn't the United Nations in the first place. It was the Peel Commission in 1937 that talked about the two-state solution. Since 1937, nothing was done. So the Palestinians will argue, they've had the first intifada. It was the first intifada that pushed them to be able to have the Oslo Agreement in the first place, under Arafat, which was under Fatah. And afterwards, they had the second intifada. So the Palestinians argue on one part that if we don't fight and attack Israel like this, it's as if nothing will be done. And some of their arguments has been on the line about the map Netanyahu went to show at the United Nations. That's their first argument. The second argument in all of this is the fact that, the West keeps supporting Israel while Israel continues to occupy land that is not theirs. And I also want you to talk about the internal infighting between Hamas and Fatah. Because even if you have a two-state solution, how are you sure that the fighting will not still continue in the Palestinian Authority? Because now Hamas is making all the noise. That's why you see Mahmoud Abbas is saying less, because he's Fatah in all of this. So those insights, Prof, I know you want to talk through them.
Well, thank you, Rufai. That's where I said, where do you want me to start? If we are to go into the history of that, area, what should I say? How should I handle your question? When we had the problem in South Africa, don't forget the problem between the ANC, Mandela, and Nkanta Buthelezi, who just died, recently. Both of them, again, whom I had the honor of meeting. I even hosted Buthelezi when he came to Nigeria, and I was at the institute, at that time. So, in any struggle, you are going to have divisions. There are going to be radicals who will feel that the establishment is not doing enough to advance the struggle. But as we say, one of our sayings, let us drive away the fox before we start blaming the chicken. Let us get a homeland for the Palestinians. And I believe that once that state is secured for them, it's not going to stop the infighting. Just as after Mandela was released from prison, there was still what they call black on black violence in South Africa, which has basically died down now, even though you still continue to have violence within South Africa. So we will continue to have internal divisions, but at least that will be a step forward, and it will be the responsibility of the United Nations to guarantee that the government of the Palestinian state will be able to curb. At that time now we can start to talk about terrorists. We cannot use the term terrorists now. They are freedom fighters. They are fighting for their rights. But if we get a state for the Palestinians as guaranteed by the United Nations, because I get the point you've made about the Peel decision and recommendation, but it was the United Nations that gave the legal imprimatur to the concept of the two-state in that area. One that we must, again, we must be fair, the Arabs rejected, just as I will reject any decision to take part of my land. They fought against that, but they lost the war, and they've been losing every war. You know, people, it's like, what is going on in the Ukrainian war? Russia said, I am fighting NATO. I am not fighting just the Ukrainians. The Palestinians have never fought Israel alone. They've always fought against Israel with the backing of the entire world. We can go into the history of how the United States flew in, plane loads of weapons during the 1973 war between the Arab states and Israel. So who has sent in a whole flotilla, the biggest warship in the American arsenal, who has sent it into the Middle East now, is the United States. To do what? To support Israel. So in a way, we've got to get our analysis right and the facts right. The Palestinians have always fought against the whole Western world. And there's no way they will lose. There's no way they can win that war, given what is stacked against them. But the human spirit doesn't give up. It will never give up, especially when you are fighting for justice. And even if it's going to be the last person standing with the gun, his son or his grandson will pick up that gun that is dropped. So Israel cannot have security and peace without justice in that area. And the justice must include the United Nations addressing the injustices meted out to the Palestinians.
Well, Prof, in 2018, the United Nations Security Council could not reach a resolution on Hamas. Last Sunday, with the escalation of hostilities in the Middle East between Israel and Hamas, again, the UN Security Council could not reach any binding resolution. Now, you have said that both parties are breaking international law. The Israelis are adopting a scorched earth policy in violation of Article 54 of the 1977 Geneva Convention. The Hamas, by saying they will kill people and put them on television, and these are non-combatants that they want to attack, that's in violation of Article 13 of the Geneva Convention 1949. Now, who is going to enforce this international law with the UN Security Council itself appearing so helpless? And with Israel saying there's no room for negotiation for now, that what they are focusing on is to annihilate anything that moves in the Gaza Strip. So where does that leave anybody with regard to international law?
Well, let me remind you of what Golda Meir, a famous auntie of the whole world, the Prime Minister of Israel, when some people reminded her that Moses asked for an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. And she said, well, that will leave all of us blind and toothless if we hold on to Moses' injunction. With both parties, Hamas and Israel, vowing to break international law, right, left, and center, they both will suffer for it. And it is important for us, all of us, including Arise and the excellent commentators that you have, to remind the entire world that both sides are war criminals. Because if you listen to some people, you would think that Hamas are the only people who are breaking international law. No, both parties are breaking international law. Both parties should be made to pay for it. Unfortunately, law is helpless when there are no enforcement agencies. I don't see, I mean, you've pointed out to all of us the helplessness of the United Nations Security Council. And the reason is simple. It is divided between supporters of both sides. And supporters of both sides are not behaving as men of honor. The United Nations Charter was written with the understanding that human beings who take decisions that will be rational. Unfortunately, power has overridden reason in the United Nations. The ICC had been set up. Do you think that the ICC will issue a warrant of arrest against Netanyahu? It may issue it against Hamas leaders. It will never issue it against the ICC. And I recall, if you also, because I follow your immense knowledge of the legal aspects of international affairs, you will recall there was a time when Spain and a few European countries came up with this legal doctrine of the universality of human rights and what should be done. And they decided that they were going to arrest Israeli ministers who were guilty of violation of international human rights in the occupied territories. The United States and Britain decided that if they tried it, they were going to pay heavily for it. Quietly, they dropped that issue. Because even Bush, the son, President Bush, the son, will have been arrested for his activities in Iraq if he had crossed into Europe at that time. So, in implementation of the law is not even, justice is not blind anymore.
Well, on that note, we'd like to thank you very much, Professor Bolaji Akinyemi, for your insights and for joining us on The Morning Show.